Hey, everybody. I am once again here by myself this week. I hate to disappoint, but Amanda is actually traveling from Illinois to here, and I am not doing that. So it is just me coming to you with this Facebook Live, but that's probably okay in the sense that like networking as a topic in the entrepreneurship, digital entrepreneurship world, and especially the programming world, is probably more of my domain than Amanda's. She handles more of like internal stuff, and for Hit Subscribe, I do business development, and that does involve a lot of networking. So this is a bit of a departure from our usual topics, which is kind of exciting for me. This is actually the kind of thing I might talk about on my programming blog, Dead Tech, because I get a lot of like reader questions about professional matters, consulting, that type of thing. So networking, I guess it's probably an interesting topic to some and a horrifying topic to others. And I was one of those people for a long time because I remember my first experience with the idea of professional networking. It was just the worst. I went to a pretty well-known, like prestigious computer science school for my undergraduate degree. Got a degree in computer science. Life was good. And then I actually graduated in December of 2001 into the teeth of the dot-com bubble bursting. So for this like brief aberration, this blip in history, it was super hard to find a programming job. Everybody in like the years before me that had graduated was getting laid off. And there I was going in like directions that as an undergrad I never would have assumed I'd go, given how much demand there had been for grads just a year or two earlier. So I like took a job at Radio Shack doing like retail sales, delivering packages for UPS. So anyway, but during the course of all of this, I was of course trying to find actual like entry-level programming jobs with no luck. And so I went to like job fairs, this type of thing, and that included networking events. And these were pretty sad affairs. Like I would show up kind of hoping, I think, for a miracle. I didn't really know how the professional world worked. I went to, these networking fairs and I wanted to network with people, which meant like, hey, can you please give me a job? And then when I got there, I discovered that like everyone else there was like desperate and unemployed. So it was just a group of desperate, unemployed people hoping, I don't know what, like that some of us had jobs for the other ones. And it was just terrible. And so, spoiler alert, I actually didn't wind up working at UPS and Radio Shack my entire career. I got a programming job and then another. And the rest is history. I've actually been serially employed since then. Like I've never gone more than 2 weeks at a time without working. And that was vacation. So it turned around for me. And I never looked back on, I guess, that time and the concept of networking for a long time. Like networking was just something desperate people did. So I thought of it for a lot of years. But then as I went off on my own, became a consultant and started to be more and more of an entrepreneur, be in sales conversations, I started to see a different side of networking. So let me, I guess, first stop here and define what maybe I mean by networking, because not everybody would necessarily have the same definition, but I have kind of a specific concept for this. And networking is a mode of like exploratory interaction where you and another person are trying to figure out how you can help one another. And it really is reciprocal to at least some degree. So a good example of this, if I fast forward today, might be something that I do for Hit Subscribe, business development. I will often have conversations with executives at other companies that are purely exploratory. Like an example is Hit Subscribe is a content marketing firm, but I've talked to a couple of different CEOs of PR firms. And the idea there is Hit Subscribe doesn't have any need for a PR firm, nor do those PR firms need content marketing, but we both have similar clients. So we talk about what's called a mutual referral relationship where, if we as Hit Subscribe see that a client could use a PR firm, we'll refer this firm, and, we hope for the same. So that's a true kind of like 50-50 equally beneficial partnership, and it's a great example of like what networking can do for you. There are other examples, like on the other extreme would have been, let's say that back when I was at these sort of desultory networking events right after college, if a CEO had showed up and said, hey, I could sure use a programmer, that would have been a lot more of a benefit for me than it would have been for that CEO. There would have been benefit going both ways, but, one would outweigh the other by a lot. So it's a mutually beneficial conversation, or a conversation that seeks to establish something that's mutually beneficial with the parties, but there is kind of a proportion of how much one or the other benefits. Okay, so that's a lot of backstory to the question I have here, which is what does networking look like in the programming world or like the digital entrepreneurship world? Now, those are definitely not the same world, because what networking looks like in the programming world is interesting. I think if you asked a lot of programmers what they do by way of networking, they would talk about going to conferences or speaking at conferences, or going to user groups and speaking there. User groups, for those of you that don't know, are basically like kind of mini conferences that occur more regularly. And what developers would talk about, developers would talk about networking as basically these situations where they meet up and exchange ideas with their peers. But I would actually not really consider that networking. It's mutually beneficial in the sense of, I guess, acquired knowledge, but it doesn't really have too much of an impact directly on their careers. So networking in the programming world is actually kind of rare, because the unemployment rate of programmers after the entry level is effectively zero. If you're a professional programmer and you want a job, all you really need to do is call a recruiter or two and say, I want a job, and you will have a job. So you don't as much do these types of exploratory conversations as a matter of course. Now, it's not to say that they don't happen, it's just not nearly as common. Networking in the programming world, when it does happen, at least the way I would categorize it, where you're not just kind of showing up and talking shop with people that you like, it would probably take the form of keeping in touch with colleagues that go on to other places, or maybe keeping in touch with former managers, things of that nature, like keeping those relationships warm, so that if in the future that manager that you had before that liked you needs to look for someone to come work for them, maybe they give you a call. And if you similarly want to move on to a new position, maybe you give that manager a call. That's sort of a speculative, mutually beneficial relationship, probably the most common thing you see in software, simply because anything kind of more high effort than that isn't really worth doing for programmers. Knock on wood, I hope the economy continues to be that great to find software people. So in the digital entrepreneurship world, on the other hand, it's a much different animal. And here you see a lot of the sort of desperate flavor of networking that I mentioned before, where maybe you get tired of being in the workforce for whatever reason. I don't really know. Maybe you get laid off of your job. People enter the digital entrepreneurship space for all sorts of reasons. And often when they enter that space, it's kind of the whole, like, I'm going to throw up a business page on Facebook and, like, I'm not trying to be snide or anything, but, like, look at me, I got a business, I have cards. And then a lot of those conversations tend to be like, hey, I don't really have any idea how to make money with this bootstrap digital entrepreneur thing that I'm doing. Would you like to give me money? Would you like to give me money? So you start to enter a lot of these very one-sided type of conversations. A lot of the people in the digital entrepreneurship space do, at least initially. And they sometimes band together the way that, like, I did, in the entry-level programming space, into clumps where they sort of try to, like, promote each other. But nobody's really bringing a whole lot of value to the table there. They're kind of hoping that a lot of value will flow their way. Now, over the course of time, a lot of these folks will get more established and then have more value to offer and be in better and better shape to have, true, like, mutually beneficial networking conversations. But I draw a contrast with programming where, after the entry level in programming, you're kind of set. So you don't really need this, and, unless you're really kind of into going out and meeting people and trying to have these conversations, you probably don't bother. Whereas in the digital entrepreneurship world, you really often need to bother a whole lot. So that is an answer to the question that I have here, like, what does it look like? So the next question, covering the back half of this, is what are some tips and tricks you've learned about how to meaningfully build connections so you can effectively grow professionally? This is fairly straightforward for me, and whether it's in the programming world, digital entrepreneurship world, or whatever your world is, the biggest piece of advice that I can offer for networking is always think first about what you can do for the other party that you're talking to. So don't think so much about what you might get out of it, but, like, what could you possibly do? So Take that conversation I mentioned having with the PR firms or anybody else where I'm talking to an executive and I think that maybe they could refer clients to hit subscribe, but I could refer clients to them. The way that I prepare for that conversation is I imagine that basically they're almost hiring me for a half an hour as a consultant. And so I'm going in and all I'm thinking about is, okay, how could I bring you business? Tell me a little bit about what you do, what your sales pitch is like to your clients, and how would I look at my client base and recognize somebody that could use your services. To me, that's the entire prep work for the conversation. And that's true of every single conversation that I go into that's a networking one. Is all I'm really thinking about is how I can help. And the result is that tends to create situations where you're not asking for things, you're helping, and people owe you favors. And I'll expand the advice kind of in both of these arenas when it comes to networking to, I had mentioned this balance, it can be 50-50 or it can be very lopsided in either direction. I basically endeavor to create relationships, professional relationships, that are always lopsided away from me, where I'm doing a lot more for the other person than vice versa. And I think of it as kind of like the ant and the grasshopper, that parable where the grasshopper, I think it is, that's running around having fun and the ant is prepping for the winter, where I'm always, those lessons from early in my career, I'm always looking to kind of store karma or pennies in heaven in case I'm ever hard up. Because if you have done very much on kind of the value delivery side as opposed to the value consumption side, throughout your career, people will remember you as somebody that helped. And this applies to a lot of things. Like I used to kind of donate office hours at a startup incubator where I'd go and just help the startups as a renta CTO for a few hours a month, every month, free consulting. A lot of people write in through my blog and my site asking for advice. I give it. I have like YouTube channels and like an ask reader questions section on my blog. People write in all the time. I just offer advice. You go throughout your whole career doing that, and what you'll find is when you have an occasion to need something and you kind of announce that or go to people with it, people are basically like tripping over themselves to pay you back because you've done good things for them. So those are the biggest pieces of advice I would offer. And like to bring it kind of full circle, like if I could go back and offer 22-year-old Eric advice, it would be to go to those sort of awful networking meetings in dingy budget hotel lobbies with a game plan for what I could bring that offered like value to the participants there. And I don't mean like, hey, if you hire me, I'll do awesome things. But I mean like, how could I help them in the moment? Who could I introduce them to? What piece of advice could I offer? What newsletter could I suggest that they go read or thing, with job advice that they could send up? Like whatever. Even in a situation where it seems like everybody else there would have way more to offer you than vice versa, think of something, whatever it may be. So that's really kind of the best advice I can offer when it comes to networking, other than also like do it. Take opportunities to listen to people because you'll learn a lot about, your line of work. I mean, it's especially important for entrepreneurs because you're learning about what you can offer to the market, what you might be able to sell, etc. But just for anyone, like you can listen and learn a lot about what's in demand, what's out there, what you might need to know. And listening to the struggles that other people have, seeing what kind of advice you can offer, it's just valuable. It's going to serve you well throughout your career in networking and in general. So I guess my pieces of advice are always look to be helping people. And, do take some time to network, but I think of it as more like take time to explore how you might be able to help people, what you might be able to kind of give to the world. And I think that pretty much sums it up. I am hoping that next week Amanda will be here to join me. I don't see any reason that wouldn't be true, but then again, we didn't know she would be traveling this week. So if you are looking for Amanda, please always tune in every week because there's a pretty good chance she'll be here. And I will almost certainly be here. So with that, I will catch you next time.